So at the moment, especially as a pandemic, do you think? So obviously, I'm not suggesting you want to criticise government, but in relation to government and the way that there are obviously so many different needs, but what they're actually saying to schools basically is you need to have your online policy, so that
Yeah.
needs to be published. And they need to start thinking more about, or already should have started thinking about blended learning. Do you think that's sufficient, or do you think there should be stronger advice about how to basically manage all these different individuals, and how do you understand their different learning styles, and start supporting them and teaching them in to probably maximize on each individual's child's ability?
I think it's desirable, especially in the current circumstances we're in, to have access to the knowledge and capabilities to really understand the requirements and needs of a child from a natural concept. The problem is the expectation of parents and other individuals that are working with children in the conditions they're in. We can't expect it because of other challenges they face. So the best way of doing this is to simplify the process by having some form of service or some form of technology that can take the brunt of the load of the information that can be remotely managed and accessed by specialists, and therefore just provide very simple instructions or simple frameworks that can be remotely adhered to showcase this. The problem that we're facing now, and what we're finding, is that with COVID-19, us as a company, I wouldn't say we're thriving from the pandemic, because we're yet to obviously have a platform launched. But what we've noticed is that the attitude and the appetite for taking on a solution like ours has been evolving positively ever since, whereby now that remote learning and blended learning is the hot topic, especially in the national narrative, the national conversation. What we are finding is there's loads of different e-learning platforms and online content out there. BBC Bite Size is now back in popularity after a decade in the abyss, and all those things there. That's all well and good, but it's always the question: how do you manage it? How do you regulate it? How do you actually observe the progression of each child, and therefore ensure that by having all this access to information that's out there, is actually structured in a way that's actually going to improve the child's outcomes? So the key thing for us and to facilitate this is to have some form of framework of information management. We need to understand in terms of how the child, some of user-friendly and user-capable way for a child to essentially self-regulate or to self-report their needs of progression, so that their caseworker or their teacher or the SENCO itself can then correctly coordinate the distribution of content and therefore the structure of each child's curriculum requirements from a remote perspective, so it hits on track. And then after COVID-19, once we eventually come out of the pandemic and come to some form of normality, it's not to fall off that and go back to normal, but to actually evolve these mechanisms of observation, of data collection and processing, so that it's not just focused on children with SEND, but as we mentioned before, it's focused on all children that are either falling behind or need an extra boost to achieve what they need to. But it's all psychological transformation that's needed. Change managers need to understand, who is a technophile compared to a technophobe, and therefore those that are much more capable of accessing and utilizing technology should be the ones, or could be the ones, that are essentially the main users of such a framework or such a platform. And also to ensure that we have collaboration and adoption from all partners, because you've got to remember, this is a multi-agency approach. We have to ensure that there are mechanisms of information and collaboration with all stakeholders to ensure that the precise approach to decide on how to work with a child, or the interventions that work with a child, are not only relative to the child's needs, but are compliant and are regulated. So again, if I wish we had the foresight that we could have to assess the issues that are coming now, And I also wish that we had used this foresight to provide a solution about 2 years ago. Because if that was the case, with what we've got planned, it would have thrived in this current situation whereby we can remotely monitor the needs of children, but also can we push the technology even further, where the conundrum of, examinations and how examinations have been terminated, and looking at ways to, assess a child's attainment based on the teacher's perspective. If you've got information based on the progress that is quite clearly documented based on observational reports, and information is collected from the child and collected from all stakeholders who work around them, then it's a simple assessment to see whether if they meet certain thresholds, and also whether if they are projected to hit a certain level of attainment based on that. That's always been our approach to assessment.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'll have another book. But actually, coming back to the, some people will probably say, "Oh man, there's not enough money in the sort of SEN area," and I do appreciate that. But actually, what your solution and what your program ultimately is trying to do is ultimately try and get to the point where actually the money that's there is actually targeted better and better spent. So
Exactly.
Actually, you're saving money. Well, not necessarily saving money, but what you're definitely doing is making sure it's focused and put in the appropriate places and used appropriately.
Yeah, we're looking at, so I think the best suited term for this is looking at financial efficiencies.
Yeah.
Because what we do not want is, we do not want to have technology that's going to have a massive siphon jobs. Retention of caseworkers and officers at the local authority level is poor, to say the least, is as poor as it is with teachers. So we can't afford to lose more people that are observing and managing the cases, and therefore local education employees. But the main thing is this: if we can understand that every supplier, every resource, every item of content and the delivery of content can always be negotiated, can always be made much more economically addressable if you understand the needs of the population. So one of the concepts that we've been taking to local authorities is this: we can put a system in, we can analyze in terms of the child's needs progression, the interventions, and all those things there. And then we could do a report. We can actually put a dashboard that basically showcases which child has which type of needs, and which child has access to either a particular type of intervention, a particular provision, and then whether if those outcomes are met. And then once you understand in terms of the general populace or segmented population of who's accessing your local offer, then you can look at in terms of, okay, so rather than we got a contract in with a supplier to work with maybe 15 children of this need, but now we've got this next level insight of the general populace of children that utilize the service, is not 15, it's actually more 200. Go to the supplier and negotiate a better deal based on economies of scale. We do that in other professions. We do that all the time within our supply chain. Why are we doing this in education? Because there's lack of information and there's lack of need to put the right information systems to really monitor that, and therefore have like adaptive or automated provision mapping. So one of the things we're working on is that how do we actually capture this information and therefore put together much more of like an intuitive commissioning structure, where rather than looking at the commissioning of a child's needs based on an annual review, or based on, a strategic commissioner could look at the needs of a service after, the tender process. So normally a tender contract is anything between 5 and 7 years. They review everything. That's too long. If you've got the right analytics and the right processing power and support that facilitates it, if a child's progression is going, you can record it and see in terms of how well they're doing based on work, or how not well they're doing, or how less engaging that the system or the structure of the curriculum is, then you could use this information to structure in terms of how to play and not to play in terms of your progression. We use it, for example, look at apps for trading. You get these insights all the time in terms to understand how much you can buy or sell stocks or commodities or anything like that to gain some sort of capital advantage.
Yep.
That same framework can be utilized in education if you have the information that's there. So again, these are the type of things where I always say, yes, we're living in austerity. Yes, there's restricted funding, but we're not smart how we utilize this money. From when there's £40 million taken from the public purse that is given in compensation just to correct certain mistakes in the EHC plans. And once again, this is not compensation to correct or fund the needs of the child. This is a compensation that's addressed by the court. Therefore, there's going to be more money that needs to be pushed into alternative provision. We can better manage it, but again, that's a challenge that we're more than capable, more than ready to take on.